Good morning, dear colleagues. The Free Crimea project of the Fund of National Strategy and the Crimean Media Center start our next press conference dedicated to the situation in the next Crimea. The topic for today is the situation with humanitarian and charitable organizations in the occupied Crimea, featuring our invitees, renowned experts on the topic, Tamila Tasheva, Krym SOS co-founder and coordinator, Kostiantyn Zolotarevskyi, head of the headquarters of International Human Rights Commission in Europe, United Kingdom, CIS and Middle East, and Maksym, Dotsenko, head of the Humanitarian Aid Department in the Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine. I'm the moderator of this press conference. My name is Berezovets, and we have an expert from the Free Crimea Center, Roman Ostapchuk. He will provide details on the infographics prepared for this event today. The humanitarian and social topics are of particular relevance for the Crimea because of known events that happened there a year ago in March 2014. Everything that's happened since then, particularly with regard to human rights in the occupied Crimea, is of particular interest for us, and our speakers will particularly speak about human rights violations and also about the need to protect human rights of Crimea residents. I will provide you, I will briefly revisit the situation, reminding you that the Crimea was annexed last year based on the Russian Spring sentiments in Russia. There was some humanitarian aid collected in the Russian Federation and many regions of Russian Federation collected funds, and it led to a lackluster end when the then Prime Minister Aksyonov, time ago, said that the aid was collected in a non-transparent way and the majority of that aid was stolen. It was about huge amounts, like the Belgorod Oblast managed to collect about $7 million, and Tatarstan or Yamal-Nenetsk region, they collected tens of millions of dollars. This aid was meant for the Crimeans, yet they were stolen, and those were just the beginnings of the process. And this infographic shows that the countries that are deemed donors, humanitarian donors, the governments of Germany, Lithuania, the US, Sweden, the Netherlands, that have collected and tried to transfer this humanitarian aid to the Crimea, had problems. The key problem with this in the Crimea concerns certain difficulties with accepting the aid, because the main routes of transport is exactly the Kerch crossing, and the Russians try to use air carriers. The paradox, and Tamila knows about it, is that the major part of the humanitarian aid was sent to Sevastopol. There are huge disparities in the supply of the rest of Crimea and the Crimea say of all the public transport needs, 70% of rolling stocks was delivered to Sevastopol, to the detriment of other cities, and this sharply unbalanced support of Sevastopol has contributed to the fact that most of those supporting the Russian annexation live in Sevastopol. And the districts that were particularly praised by Aksionov and Konstantinov, Simferopolsky, Bakhchisarayski, etc., they've showed least possible support for the local Crimean Tatar population. Now I'd like to give the floor to Tamila Tasheva.
Thank you. I will tell you right away, in that field we are not experts, because in general information that collects any advocacy group as to a violation of human rights, so on social economic situation is more complicated. Now they don't speak about violations of humanitarian law, which is about social economic situation with Crimeans, and there is the list. We don't receive that information from Crimea, and that information is not spread. That's why about human rights, many more people speak about human rights in our organization, advocacy group, and we collect and monitor violation of human rights in Crimea. But social economic situation is we collect information only when it's related to violation of human rights, like right for healthcare, right for a job, because that is a part of human rights, because rights of Crimeans who didn't get the passport of Russian Federation, and they are abused because it's very difficult for them to find a job, for example, or we monitor, and that is related to social political situation at the right for movement, because according to last decrees of Russian administration in Crimea, now the majority of internal movements of Crimeans should be done through credentials. You cannot buy a ticket for you need ticket if you don't have credentials, IDs, and they demand passport of Russian Federation. If to speak about humanitarian organizations and about NGOs in Crimea, the issue is the majority of organizations and that still exist, formally or informally, they were registered in under Ukraine, and now they facing a big issue because to register, how to register their activity, and in the majority of cases they were not able to re-register. As to humanitarian assistance from other countries, or we read information that residents of Crimea, they get humanitarian assistance, and they send that for the needs of the East, and to someone else there could be some revolutionary events. In fact, so we had such information, but it's not big money that can be collected and sent to LNR, so-called LNR and DNR. Our organization is working on IDPs and protection of their rights. And even last year in the summer or autumn, a lot of people were coming from the east of Ukraine. They went to Crimea. They understood that here's Russian administration is there, and de facto the government of Russia is there. So they went with big hopes that there would be a lot of humanitarian assistance for their needs, and they will be supported all the time, but that did not happen. After that, we saw the activity which is called a movement, when the residents from eastern regions that came to Crimea, they had to move further to Russian regions, or some of the people who quite the opposite went to the mainland Ukraine, and they decided they cannot live in Crimea. Some are still there. According to, we monitor the situation as to IDPs in Crimea. Now they have no assistance. Those people, some of them find job, and they survive the way they can. So in that sense, there is no big humanitarian assistance for residents of Crimea. What I would like to mention, why this humanitarian assistance in general, why it's not coming to Crimea, because this is an occupied territory. We understand that, and officially that assistance cannot come. And if we speak about international assistance or technical aid, which is sent to Crimea, mostly it goes to representatives of or IDPs from Crimea. I mean financial assistance from EU or from the US. And for Crimea, no, they don't provide assistance or aid to Crimea, maybe in some limited aid. It is prohibited by international law and all the norms we have in Ukraine. I will stop on this, and if there are other comments, I will be happy. Thank you, Tamila. What you told, it's very important, and it shows that because of illegal annexation of Crimea, aid in that size that then it could come compared to Donbass. It cannot get, because of those obstacles that are set up by representatives of Russian Federation. There was one scandalous situation, and we don't remember that, capturing property of Red Cross, Ukrainian Red Cross in Crimea. The organization is international. They have their departments in Ukraine and in Russia, but they just brutally stole humanitarian aid, their computers in that organization, and then they replaced the plague. They put a Red Cross of Russian Federation, and that was in Red Cross. It's absolutely unpolitical organization, and here's interference of politics. And when the Ukrainian office captured Ukrainian, and they refused to pay back for damages. And here's Mr. Zolotarevskyi. Yes, unfortunately, at present, Crimea and two humanitarian organizations, law advocacy organizations, and on humanitarian issues, it's a terra incognita for humanitarian aid. Even OSCE has made it in Crimea in order to monitor these issues, and doesn't have a mandate. And in the light of new laws or additions to all laws, the law 2004 from June, as an addition to the rights of citizens on occupied territories, and Order 415 on crossing the border of occupied territories. For example, there is the norm is absent. The grounds to cross the border for advocacy groups and or mass media. So any reason can work, but through migration service, if about possible accreditation in Crimea. Some law advocacy organization, it's not a base to receive such a permission. On the other hand, Maksym active. This Crimean field mission is very active. In difference to Amnesty International, they analyzed the situation just in Crimea in January. It's the only organization that can cover from territory of Crimea the situation related to human rights. It is paralyzed because visiting Crimea through Russian Federation, that's a violation of laws of Ukraine, which is unacceptable, and on the other hand, requests to Ukrainian authorities, and because Crimean field mission consists of advocates from Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, they could be suspected in separatism, and that's they can get about 7 years in Russia. So we have a legal vacuum in Crimea in order to solve or influence on these issues, especially in a sense of humanitarian aid. But first of all, we should pay attention to the legislation on the basis of which such relations were built. For us to prevent in the future, prevent those mistakes, and for us not to have the same in Donbass. The law 1207 from May 14, 2014 on rights of people on occupied territories, and from that law, point 13, free trade zones, economic zones in Crimea, 4032 from August 12. The laws that cause not understanding how such laws could be prepared, and especially now additions to those laws, they are on the basis of those laws that were adopted for Crimea. We disagree with that law, for example, with formulation, because, for example, as Tamila told us, to rights of people, of Ukrainians who lived in Crimea. That's the issue with their citizenship. For example, point 1205, Article 12 of that law puts Ukrainian law, puts people, announces them non-residents, and refuses them citizenship to them. On the other hand, I just add the name free economic zone. According to the law, it's a zone of for private investment in economy. How it can be applied to occupied territories? That could be a zone of special economic regime, of some special relations, but not free trade zone, which is under the norms of international trade law and trade for currency and customs, etc. So it creates precedents on the basis of which they legalize institutes of occupational authorities on the territory of Crimea, and also we think it will go to the territory of Donbass.
For example, there is information about the Ukrainian Railways company, as its manager, Alexei Zavgorodny, said. There are negotiations to restore railroad connection with the Crimea to the extent that they are ready to start the mechanism in an hour. But again, we have a resolution following the referendum adopted by the UN General Assembly on the next day after the Crimean referendum to recognize the territorial integrity of Ukraine, which specifically says that any attempts to change the status of the territory of the Crimea and Sevastopol shall be subject to international sanctions. We closely watch vessels entering Crimean ports or air carriers during flights to the Crimea. According to international laws, these vessels, whether airborne or naval, are subject to arrest, and there are specific jailment term behind bar from 3 to 5 years for those individuals or officers found guilty of it. And in this case, Ukrzaliznytsia would fall into this sanction mechanism if they really think of restoring this railroad connection. There are really numerous discussions regarding how to deal with the occupied territories, whether Ukraine has to trade or has not to trade with them, and what is the humanitarian situation in the occupied territory. Unfortunately, the very notion of the hybrid war, hybrid peace, hybrid friendship or hybrid hate have emerged, and they effectively prevent us from coming to a final verdict on that. And I think that's like with any process, we first need to come to terms, clear terms of it. If we deem these are terrorists there, it is not possible to trade with terrorists or hold negotiations with terrorists, because it will create a case law for their subsequent legalization elsewhere. Question remains about the position that the Ukrainian government is ready to assume here. Our vision is that the borders of the occupied regions should be closed. No trade whatsoever. There is no question of trading with them. The issue of dealing with problems on the occupied territory should be referred to international organizations with proper mandate, whether it is about the Crimea or the occupied Donbas territories. It is the only way to properly establish political priorities of dealing with these territories and their citizens. And it goes without mention that all the citizens in the Crimea and in the occupied territories of Donbas are the citizens of Ukraine, and no acts, laws or bylaws can harm their rights. Under no circumstances it should come. And this is actually our position. This is what we fight for. And this is what we have in mind by trying to exert pressure on governmental bodies to make them take proper decisions. Thank you, Kostiantyn. Please. I would agree in many aspects with my colleagues, and I have some reservations as well. Being a representative of a human rights activist organization, we are against closing the borders with the Crimea. And we think the decision taken in December of the past year is absolutely discriminatory as regards the Crimea and the Crimeans. If speaking about closing the borders, we should discern between goods transportation and movement of residents of the mainland Ukraine or the Crimea. And it would be great to see Ukrzaliznytsia launch railroad connections with the Crimea, but unfortunately it is not possible anymore, because we see that railroads were practically demolished in the areas that would connect the Crimea with Ukraine, and there are witnesses to confirm that. As regards the Crimean field mission, they first of all are not a humanitarian organizations, they are human rights organization, And as such, they may not enter the Crimea, not because of the new procedure of entering the occupied territories, but also because the very operations of this organization have been effectively banned on the territory of the Russian Federation. You know that they've introduced the list of such foreign agents in the Russian Federation, and we have this organization included there, and IRI, and the Polish Fund for Democracy, the International Renaissance Foundation, and many others included in it. So it is about banning them from operating on the whole territory of Russian Federation, not just on the territory of the Crimea. And I nearly forgot to mention it that, if I'm not mistaken, on 19th of May, the Russian Duma adopted this law on unwanted organization, thus adding to complexities of humanitarian and human rights organizations' operation in the Crimea. I think that in the future we'll see which of these organizations have managed to legalize themselves on the territory of the Crimea according to the Russian legislation. But I really suspect that they will be mostly unable to operate there, because any organization which is at least neutral in many political aspects is unable to work in Russian conditions, because they really need to show their loyalty to the Russian administration, even at the Crimea.
Minister of Social Policy, Mr. Dotsenko. Good morning. I wanted to say more, but because of some reasons I cannot do that. Because since March 16 last year, officially, through the Ministry of Social Policy, Crimea has not received any humanitarian cargo. Of course, so there are objective reasons, and international organizations cannot send humanitarian cargoes, and the only positive moment is that, including for Crimeans, the IDPs from Crimea, they receive quite a lot of humanitarian aid from EU and from other countries, and from the US. We do everything that depends on us for those cargoes to be processed as quick as possible, for them to reach final users as quick as possible. So I confirm that in 2014-2015, no cargo was sent to Crimea. Crimea received, as I understand, once or two times, but that was on the territory of Ukraine, officially when you were re-registered in Ukraine. So this is the situation we have. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Maksym, Roman. Our infographics, and please. Good morning. I would like to show to you infographics that we prepared. I want to say that as we received data from social policy, the data, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine is done according to Ukrainian legislation and the law of Ukraine on humanitarian aid, regulation of the Cabinet of Ministers 39 about one register of those who receive humanitarian aid, and also regulation of Cabinet of Ministers 241 about the order of cooperation between different governmental authorities. And at the same time, Russian legislation is guided by federal law on assistance of Russian Federation, and separate act of Russian Federation, and the tax and benefits for payments to non-budget institutions, and also regulation of the government of Russian Federation. I want to say that until 2013 in Ukraine, humanitarian aid and cargoes, humanitarian cargoes, we had the same. Like in Ukraine, and in Ukraine in 2013, in Ukraine there was a commission by the Cabinet of Ministers, which that was a collective body that recognized cargoes as humanitarian aid, but when there is a collective responsibility, there was irresponsibility also, collective. That was a circle of people that worked for their own interests, and now we have the Ministry of Social Policy responsible for cargoes, for giving reliable humanitarian aid, and that is regulated by national legislation. As to Crimea and Sevastopol, according to the data of on December 21, when there was legislation, Ukrainian, it was recognized from there were 26 cargoes for up to 200 tons. That's humanitarian aid, and the country's donors that were provided assistance to the peninsula are Germany, Lithuania, Turkey, the US, Sweden, and the Netherlands. I want to say, in the Ministry of Social Policy, there is a register of those who receive humanitarian aid. The database of all organizations, charity organizations, and not only, that can get humanitarian aid. At present, there are 12 organizations in Crimea and 2 in Sevastopol. So for not a big territory, comparing with the continent, mainland Ukraine, 14 organizations, so there's quite a good sign. And the organizations that were actively working on social assistance, humanitarian assistance, and there is League of Social Workers and the Union of Crimean Tatar Women, and many others that were active. They provide assistance to the population of Crimea. And in 14-15, we have information we received from Ministry of Social Policy the last order to recognize cargoes as humanitarian aid that was done in December 2014, and in that year, cargoes only from 4 organizations were recognized as humanitarian cargoes, and light vehicle, which was considered to be a humanitarian aid, but those are humanitarian nuances, and provided it for 1 car of for 50 tons. That is in 2014, and countries donors that presented humanitarian aid, they include Germany, Turkey, and the US. The information which is open in internet, one country that provided assistance to occupied Crimea, that is China. Red Cross of China did that humanitarian aid that was provided for only Crimea, but also for Russian Federation. A part of medicine was delivered to Sevastopol hospitals. There's funny information that quite a big part of humanitarian aid from continental part of Russian Federation was provided to Crimea, and maybe it's a paradox, but even officials of the occupied Crimea, they say that humanitarian aid was just stolen. 40% of that aid for poor people, it was stolen. Also, an interesting aspect. We can show that
how the occupation government works with humanitarian organizations and generally with the humanitarian movement. Say the organization of society organization that received medical humanitarian aids last year in 2015 saw a statement from the Crimean Deputy Minister of Health Protection requesting the destruction of this medical item for reasons of these being not in line with some medical standards. The total value of that assistance, of that aid, was about $470,000, but eventually it was decided that it was not so much needed in the Crimea, and effectively the occupation powers destroyed this humanitarian aid. Thank you, Roman. Actually, the numbers are really frightening, not just for us, but also for the Crimeans, because the local government of the Crimea shows increasing level of problems arising. Some heads of Crimean governmental bodies were sacked, and from what I've heard from my friends in the Crimea, even Russia's Dmitry Medvedev was shocked with the level of resources stolen in the Crimea. Now we are ready to take your questions, please. Alexei Runyan, Krym Realities, Radio Svoboda, Radio Freedom. How great is the needs for humanitarian aid in the Crimea? You mentioned of humanitarian aids attempted to be delivered to the Crimea in 2013 and 14, and could you elaborate what type of humanitarian aid was delivered? If we check for the single register of humanitarian aid, we'll see 14 organizations there, and the humanitarian aid is classified into medical items, and a great deal of humanitarian aid that was received in 2012, 13 and 14 concerned medical and health protection items that were delivered to local healthcare institutions and hospitals. Then we see the subclass that concerns garments and footwear, mostly used type, and some substantial humanitarian aid was received by the League of Crimean Tatar Women from the United States, from Turkey, that concerned new and used garments, footwear, and the total bulk of that aid was rather high, given the huge needs of a vulnerable group of population for that in the Crimea. How would you estimate the need for humanitarian aid now? I think they surely need it because the vulnerable people and low-income households have remained there. On the other hand, given that I think Alexei knows it and many others know it, and I have my friends and relatives there, the Crimea today feels strong shortages in medicines, in foodstuffs, garments, and my family and my relatives live there in the Crimea, and they say that when before the occupation they would buy clothes pretty much similar to those found in the mainland Ukraine. Now they have garments mostly of Russian produced, and the one that was referred as imported one before, there is practically no such garment in the territory of the Crimea, and surely there is a need there. It is because of impossibility to ship in imported products. And as regards the Crimean Tatars, I'd say that they would not accept humanitarian aid from Russia in principle. And in general, probably in some exceptional cases when there is an urgent need for something, maybe they might accept something from Turkey, because the people strongly have the strong feeling of national dignity, and they are not inclined in the least to accept something from occupants. There is also another very prominent fact that was highlighted several months ago. It concerned the orphan house, the only one in the Crimea that was effectively closed by the Crimean government. You know, the Crimea has long been regarded as a place with special attitude towards homeless children. And you know how hard it was in Soviet times for homeless people to come closer to Moscow or central regions of the country. Many of them were effectively forced to move elsewhere, and some of them had to settle in the Crimea. There is another problem that these are drug addicts. We mentioned it at one of our previous press conferences that methadone therapy dependent individuals suffer strongly in absence of this substitution therapy. You know that the Russian legislation disproves the alternative substitution therapy. And according to independent media reports in the Crimea, just in the past 6 months, and mind you, this is not official statistics, more than 60 methadone-dependent Crimeans died because of the lack of access to the substitution therapy. And unfortunately, we have to state it that the situation there is rather complicated and has a clear tendency to aggravation. And I see you have something to add.
With methadone, all the programs we had in Ukraine, they continue. In the cost of humanitarian aid, Ukraine is provided with methadone. In Crimea? No, not in Crimea. I speak about Crimea. According to Russian legislation, it is prohibited. But Ukraine is clear. Yeah, Ukraine continues to provide that, but we have no access to occupied territories. Yes, this is a problem. May seem made up, but these are sick people. It's a normal humanitarian practice which doesn't contradict the legislation and the law. We have such law in Ukraine, and that's a position quite legal in difference to Russian Federation. And this is one of the aspects which is very difficult of understanding by the majority of people, especially Russia. Why should we support drug addicts, or just in general drug addicts? Why we should support? That's a normal practice which continues in Ukraine, thank God, and that allows those people to continue living. If you have some final comments, and we still have 10 minutes, I would like to add such a thesis. We speak about Crimea, but Crimea is Ukraine and Donbass. We see that for two regions, occupied regions, they develop the same law. There are some differences. Crimea was annexed without active battles. In Donbass, we have active military activities, but in Donbass region, at least there is representatives of the UN, and also they opened the office of Dutch Union Committee on IDPs, so the ID occupational authorities they kicked out from Donetsk region. Or at least there is some presence, there is some regulation of some coordination of supplies of humanitarian aid to Donbass. Crimea is closed, is blocked, and the number for NGOs and also for humanitarian aid. So the work of NGOs in Crimea should be focused on broadening the mandate and the presence of NGOs, international NGOs in Crimea, in such a way that for these issues, problems should be solved, because if there are no NGOs, nobody will deal with them. So that's task number one. For International Commission on Human Rights, and we have our monitoring mission on occupied territories in Donbass. We will think about the mandate of the monitoring mission. It should be broadened. Should include Crimea. Then maybe we'll have more influence on the humanitarian situation in Crimea and own processes in Crimea. I completely agree. We discuss it all the time when we have negotiations with international NGOs and also with the Ukrainian government that humanitarian and advocacy missions should be in Crimea, whether it's OSCE or Human Rights Watch and or Amnesty International. And the former missions, they were in Crimea, but they were not based there. And there should be a based mission there, field mission there. That is the decision of Ukrainian government to provide the right of those international missions there to be present there, because without them, the agreement that mission will not be able to be present there. When I spoke to international colleagues and representative of the US in the UN, Samantha Power, she told the same. Yes, we would like that. That's very important. But now we don't see how, unfortunately, we can introduce that. How we can do that in Crimea? She says, yes, it's a problem, because if there was at least some mission that would, they would be responsible to those violations. Because the main problem is that we can monitor through public media what is violated there, but we can not have a quick reaction to those violations, how to help those people whose rights are abused, and human rights in general. This is a broad field, and but I mean also healthcare. Now it's the number of deaths went up in Crimea because my relatives, for example, they're working in healthcare, as far as I know. The medicine, which was present in common hospitals, now they don't have that. You have to speak about surgery, which is related to products or materials that should be brought from abroad. That is also very complicated. And for example, surgery on eye surgery, it's very difficult to do it because crystal, which is not brought, that is material which is brought from the US. Now you cannot take it in. That's why people who need that, and so surgeons, they have to develop some kind of schemes how to bring that material to Crimea. They buy somewhere in Ukraine and then they ship it to Crimea. This is nonsense, but this is what has influence on common people who live on occupied territory, on the occupied. Maksym, your comment. As I would like to say such a thing. Occupation of Crimea encouraged to change legislation cause changes in humanitarian policy of our country. In a year and a half, a lot is done. We simplified many procedures, and I would like Crimea to use those benefits, and let's hope that the return of Crimea will happen very soon. I think that we should believe into that, because without belief, without faith, no results without faith, as Bible says, and faith is dead without deeds. So we should do something, like all participants, especially initiative Krym SOS, which does a lot practically to ease the life of IDPs from Crimea and those people who became captives on occupied territories and hostages on occupied territories. I'd like to thank you all panelists, that you found time for this. And traditionally, our press conference is watched by many people in Crimea, and not only supporters, but especially those who believe that we do something criminal. We say hello, and we remember about you, and it will be your guests. It will happen sooner or later. And thank you very much. The press conference is over. See you in the future.